Kohelet chapter 1 verses 12 through 15. Ani Kohelet hayisi melech al Yisrael b'Yerushalayim. I, Kohelet, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. So as we said, up until now was a preface, and now we're beginning the actual discussion in the book itself. And so in the original division of the book, this was the start of a new chapter. The king is saying, Kohelet is saying, I was the king in Jerusalem, and I began the following research. V'nasati es libi lidrosh v'laser b'chachma al kol asher nasa tachas hashamayim hu inyan ra nasan Elohim livnei ha'adam la'anos bo. I set my heart to study and examine with intelligence all that was done under the heaven. It is a bad matter which God gave to man to engage in. So in other words, if you try to examine everything that happens in the world, as the book will discuss in greater depth to come, and as we started discussing in the preface as well, if you examine things closely out there in the world, you see that all of it is essentially fruitless and for naught. It's all essentially a bad matter. That's one way to read the sentence. Another way to read the sentence at a slightly deeper level is that the engagement itself is also fruitless. So I set out to engage in studying and examining with intellect and intelligence and wisdom everything that's out there, and I realized that the examination itself is ultimately fruitless and for naught. The word inyan and la'anos is also a very interesting choice of words. It has many, many different grammatical ways of constructing the word and placing it into the sentence. There's probably 5 to 10 different ways to read that word. One way to read it is a bad matter. So inyan and la'anos is a matter and something that somebody is engaged in. So to be engaged in this study is ultimately fruitless and negative. Another way to read la'anos is from the word inoi, like affliction or suffering or trouble. So it's a negative matter, it's a negative engagement. And also, believe it or not, there's actually a way to translate inoi. I won't get into the grammar, it's a little bit complicated, but there's a way to translate it as a positive engagement, which is also foreshadowing a lot of the discussion in the book, because much of the discussion in the book revolves around looking at things from different angles and seeing different aspects of the same thing, and seeing that the same thing can be positive or negative or seen in different ways in different contexts. Ecclesiastes kol hamasim shenasu tachas hashamayim v'hinei hakol hevel ur'us ruach. I observed all of the deeds that were done under the sun, and they are all meaningless and strivings of air. So first of all, when we look at all of the deeds and we look at everything that's done, we find that they're all meaningless, which is, as we discussed and as the book gets into farther along. The word usriach can be translated both as strivings of air, striving after nothing, from the concept of hevel, which we discussed earlier. So that's a sort of a mirror of the same concept. It can also be a negative inclination. It can be translated slightly differently, and it's a different translation of the word re'ut, again a bit complicated grammatically, but it can be a negative inclination. In other words, this inclination to look for deeper things is actually this curiosity, which can be seen as positive in some senses, but ultimately, if you attempt to get to the actual finality and to the actual perfect observation and perfect understanding, then you realize that this sort of curiosity is ultimately negative in that sense. Me'uvas lo yuchal liskon, v'chesron lo yuchal lihimanos. Crooked cannot be made correct, cannot be made straight, and absence cannot be counted. So this is a deep sentence, and there's several different ways and several different levels to read this at, and they all actually connect each other like layers of an onion almost. But what the sentence is saying is, number one, things are always imperfect. Everything out there, all things include imperfections, all things are missing to some extent, everything out there in the world is not perfect. And so ultimately, all of this attempt to reach perfection turns out to ultimately be meaningless, because everything out there is composed of imperfections and is ultimately imperfect, and we can never reach the finality of understanding. So that's one level to read it at. So we're talking about everything that's out there in the world. At a deeper level, we're talking about the examination itself. So what the sentence is saying is that the examination itself is me'uvas lo yuchal liskon v'chesron lo yuchal lihimanos. The examination itself is an imperfection that cannot be corrected, and an absence, something that's missing that cannot be counted. So this examination itself is imperfect. There's no way to fully reach a final reading and a final understanding of ultimate reality or philosophy or what have you. And then the same thing at one level deeper. Crooked cannot be made straight, and absence cannot be counted. So we're talking one level deeper, almost like yin and yang, reality itself, if you will. So things themselves, the nature of the world itself is composed of imperfections and lacking and things that are missing. Everything is sort of positive and negative at a certain deep level. Everything is composed of things that are there and that are not there. Things that you have, things that you don't have. And so at an ultimately deeper level, reality and nature and observation and everything in and of itself is missing things. And so there's no way to ultimately reach the perfect understanding of everything, because built into understanding itself are components and are ideas that involve absence and that involve missing and that involve imperfection. And so all of these three levels that I just explained are all ultimately really the same thing. They're just kind of a deeper understanding of the same concept. And they're all sort of inherent in this sentence itself.